The following program is brought to you by the Pacifica Program Service and Radio Archive.
What is looked upon as an American dream for white people has long been an American nightmare for black people.
You are listening to the voice of Malcolm X, speaking at a rally held in New York City in May of 1962.
We don't have to wait for any change of condition. The masses of black people in this country have long reached a decision or come to the conclusion that it's impossible to make a dream out of this nightmare. Why, I'd rather be dead than to integrate into a society like that.
This is Chris Koch. This program on Malcolm X is neither a biography nor an evaluation. It is an essay on the last 5 years of his life, the most active period of his brief political career. An attempt, on the part of a white man, I suppose I must say, to bring some sense of the intelligence and passion that Malcolm brought to bear on the development of a program for the American Negro. Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little, the son of the Reverend Earl Little, in an Omaha hospital. He was born with a hatred for the white, the grandson of a white rapist. At the age of 4, Malcolm recalled, "I remember being suddenly snatched awake into a nearly petrifying confusion of pistol shots and shouting and smoke and flames. My father had seen and shouted and shot at 2 white men who had set the fire to our house and were running away. My mother with the baby in her arms just made it into the yard before the house crashed in, showering up sparks. The police and firemen came and stood around watching the house burn the rest of the way." At the age of 6, Malcolm recalled, "I remember waking up to the sound of my mother's screaming. When I scrambled out, I saw the police in the living room." They had come to tell the family that the Reverend Earl Little, Malcolm's father, had been killed by a streetcar, as far as the family was concerned, at the hands of the white man. The family then went on welfare. The mother slowly went mad, and one by one she lost her children to the state, ending finally broken in a mental institution. Malcolm was taken into the kind custody of 2 white detention home superintendents. He was sent by them to an all-white school and was elected class president. He was a brilliant student. Malcolm would write later, "I'm not going to say that I wasn't proud." After high school, Malcolm went to Boston and Harlem and hustled in the jobs that white America leaves open for black America: shoeshine boy, bus boy, Pullman boy. He ran with white women and joined the hip black ghetto scene in earnest. At the age of 17 in 1942, Malcolm went to work in Small's Paradise in Harlem. He was fired from Small's for hustling and took to selling reefers. Malcolm wrote later, "I sold reefers like a wild man. Every day I cleared at least $30 or $40. I felt, for the first time in me, life, that great feeling of free." The feeling of freedom ended just short of Malcolm's 21st birthday, when he was busted in Boston for burglary and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This was in February 1946. In prison, Malcolm kicked a $20 a day habit cold turkey and first heard from his family about the existence of Elijah Muhammad and the black Muslims. He stopped eating pork at his brother's suggestion and gained his self-respect. He studied, copying the dictionary from A to Z, and read through the prison library. He corresponded with Elijah Muhammad and became a Muslim, arguing the faith in prison with his fellow black inmates and looking in history for confirmations of the faith. In the spring of 1952, Malcolm was released from prison, a model prisoner, and he returned to Detroit. He went almost immediately to Mosque No. 1 of the Nation of Islam. It impressed him enormously. Of his visit, he wrote later, "I had never seen any Christian-believing Negroes conduct themselves like the Muslims who came, the individuals and families alike. The men were quiet and tastefully dressed. The women wore ankle-length gowns, no makeup, and scarves covered their heads. The children were mannerly and neat." Malcolm's application for membership in the Muslims was accepted. He rose rapidly in the ranks and in 1954 was sent first to Philadelphia to organize Mosque No. 12 and then to New York to take over Mosque No. 7. In 1956 he married a Muslim sister, and in 1958 they had their first child, Attila. As Malcolm explained later, "She's named for Attila the Hun. He sacked Rome." He was to have 4 girls before he was murdered: Qibla, named after the Emperor Kublai Khan; Ilyasa, the feminine form in Arabic of Elijah, and Lumumba. These years in the Nation of Islam were good ones for Malcolm X. He clearly was enormously impressed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. Soon Malcolm X was to become the Muslims' major speaker, in fact their main drawing card, and it appears that during these years of Malcolm's participation, the Nation of Islam began to expand its small membership. He became a national figure. Malcolm wrote later, "During the next years, radio and television people began asking me to defend our Nation of Islam's program in panel discussions and debates against hand-picked scholars, both whites and some of those Ph.D. house and yard Negroes who had been attacking us." One such debate had been arranged by WBAI between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin, then certainly the best-known Negro advocate of nonviolence and cooperation with segments of the white community. It took place in our studios in November of 1960. Malcolm opened, characteristically, by stating that he did not speak for himself, but for the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He also stressed, as he always did, his conviction that his was the fastest-growing Negro movement in the United States.
I'm happy to be here today to represent the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to your audience. And as you know, Mr. Muhammad is the spiritual head of the fastest growing group of Muslims in the Western Hemisphere. And he perhaps is probably the greatest drawing card among the so-called Negro masses, more so than any other so-called Negro leader today. In proof of which, a year ago in Washington, D.C., he appeared at the Uline Arena and drew 10,000. And in New York at the St. Nicholas Arena, last year he drew 10,000. And this year, I think he drew another between 10 and 15,000. In Chicago, he drew 15,000. And I cite these things just to show you that as a man, no matter what people, whether they agree with him or disagree with him, they have to admit that the masses of the so-called Negroes are interested in hearing what he has to say. Probably in the past 2 years, he has become America's most talked about and most written about black man. And even at the present time, I'd say he's one of the most, he's the most controversial topic, namely because he's having such miraculous success in getting his program over among the so-called Negro masses.
That program was simple. It consisted first and foremost of the highest possible morality for the members of the Nation of Islam, something that would be particularly impressive for a former hustler and convict who had reformed himself. Malcolm had been highly impressed by the success of Elijah Muhammad, the success that he had had in keeping his followers committed to the tough moral principles that he advocated. So were others.
Time magazine last year, in an article about Mr. Muhammad, pointed out that he has successfully eliminated from among his followers the use of alcohol, which is one of the things that has destroyed our people here in America as a race. He has successfully eliminated dope addiction, profanity, excessive profanity, which actually stems from disrespect of self. He has successfully eliminated stealing and crime among his followers. He has, Time magazine also pointed out that he has, Mr. Muhammad has been successful in eliminating adultery and fornication and prostitution and making the black man respect his woman, something that has been characteristically absent among our men. And Time magazine also pointed out that among the Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, juvenile delinquency has been eliminated.
But the core of Elijah Muhammad's program for the Nation of Islam was the separation of white and colored people, economic independence for colored people in the United States, and eventually the creation of an all-black community.
In the U.S. News and World Report, they pointed out that Mr. Muhammad was successful in making the so-called Negroes see the importance of an economic program that would get so-called Negroes to set up stores and factories and farms to feed ourselves, grow food for ourselves, factories to manufacture things for ourselves, and places of business to create jobs for ourselves. The point behind this particular phase of Mr. Muhammad's program is to make the so-called Negro economically independent, to keep him from having to embarrass the white man by demanding that the white man give him a job, when he can actually, Mr. Muhammad feels that our people can get together and pool our resources and our talents and whatnot and make jobs for ourselves.
Ultimately, this economic independence would lead to the only condition under which whites and colored people could exist together on this planet, according to the Nation of Islam: separation in different geographical areas, either in this country or abroad.
It involves the creation of a black state for the black man, if not in America, somewhere on this earth. If not somewhere abroad, then right here in America. But primarily it involves the acquisition of some land that the black man can call his own, here or somewhere else. If the powers that be don't want it here, then they should make it possible for it to be somewhere else. If they don't want it to be somewhere else, they should make it possible for it to be right here.
Such a program of separation is similar to that proposed by black nationalist groups since well before the Civil War, and of course there were numerous attempts at colonization throughout the 19th century, some of them incidentally by President Lincoln himself, who also believed in the separation of the races. Malcolm insisted, however, that the program of the Nation of Islam was different from black nationalism, largely, he said, because of its religious base. It is interesting to note in his remarks on this score his belief in a completely deterministic universe, perhaps I should say predeterministic universe, over which he as an individual had no control. No more control, that is, than a puppet in the hand of God.
Nationalism is the political approach or a political solution to the problems that confront the so-called Negroes in America. The aim of the black nationalist is the same as the aim of the Muslim. The Muslim and the black nationalists have no differences in objective. We are pointing toward the same goal. But the difference is in method, method. The black nationalist, wherein he relies on a political solution, moral, uplifting of the moral values, whereas the Muslim, he stresses first to raise the moral standard of the so-called Negro, and by doing this, automatically, it tends to give him more dignity and self-respect, and it elevates his thinking to the point where he begins to think in terms of doing something for himself rather than to sit around and beg somebody else to share with him what they have amassed for themselves. So I would like to stress that Mr. Muhammad is not a politician. He doesn't believe that politics is the solution to the so-called Negro's problem. He says that the primary ingredient involved in our solution, it will take God. God himself has to have a hand in it, especially because the problem of the so-called Negro is so unique. His problem is different. The problem of the so-called Negro in America is different, perhaps, than the problem of any black people anywhere on this earth since the beginning of time. And so our entire approach is a religious approach. We believe that every condition that the Negro is in today was preordained, predestined, and prophesied. And we believe that we're living in the fulfillment of that prophecy today. We believe that our being here in America is in terms of biblical prophecy. We believe that the slave master's oppression of us is in line with biblical prophecy. And we believe that all of the trouble that the slave master is having on this earth today, all over the world, is all in line with fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And we also believe that Mr. Muhammad's presence in America in the midst of the so-called Negroes and his reason for teaching what he's teaching exactly as he's teaching it is all in line with the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So the one thing that I would like to stress is our program is strictly a religious program. Our solution is a religious solution. It's not a political one.
It was not, however, his program of separation that attracted followers to the Nation of Islam, but Malcolm X's militants. Malcolm was frequently characterized in the U.S. press as an advocate of violence. Despite these reports, however, Malcolm never specifically advocated a program of violence. What he did do was oppose passivity. In 1961, we invited him into the studio to talk with James Baldwin and a leader of the student sit-in movement. While Malcolm praised the sit-in students as an indication that Negroes were no longer afraid of the white man, he condemned the movement itself. As always, he spoke for Elijah Muhammad.
One of the reasons that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in teaching us here in America, is giving us a solution that differs drastically from the sit-in movement. He's trying to make us men. Now, the very fact that you find students all over the world today are standing up for their rights and fighting for their rights. But here in America, the so-called Negro students have allowed themselves to be maneuvered under a tag of sit-in. The word sit itself is not an honorable tag. Anybody can sit. An old woman can sit. A coward can sit. A baby can sit. Anything can sit. But it takes a man to stand. And when they attach this sit-in term or title to this movement, it stigmatizes it, in my opinion.
Is this the passivity of it that you object to?
Well, that actually, I guess it describes it. The name describes its nature. It's a passive thing, and also we feel that to try and sit down in another man's restaurant to drink a cup of coffee is insane. If I were in the South and a Southerner didn't want me to eat in his restaurant, and I forced my way in and then let him go back in his kitchen and prepare some coffee for me to drink, I'd consider myself insane to drink it. We don't think that that's the solution. We feel that rather than to force our way into someone else's restaurant or public place that they have established, that we should get our own. Once we have our own, we're respected for the fact that we can create our own. And that's equality right there.
Malcolm also frequently pointed out the indisputable fact that most white men in America always respected violence when it comes to stimulating social change.
The black man in America is the only one who is encouraged to be nonviolent, or the black man in Africa, or the black man in Asia. Never do you find white people encouraging other whites to be nonviolent. Whites idolize fighters. They idolize the Hungarian freedom fighters who came to this country and right now can work on jobs that the sit-in students can't get, can live in neighborhoods that the sit-in students can't live in, and can go into public places that the student sit-ins can't go, because they are fighters. Everyone loves a fighter. They respect a fighter. But at the same time that they admire these fighters, they encourage the so-called Negro in America to get his desires fulfilled with a sit-in stroke, or a passive approach, or a love your enemy approach, or pray for those who despitefully use you. This is insane. And we feel as Muslims, until we see white people practicing this nonviolence, until we see white people take Pearl Harbor. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the American white man didn't say, pray for the Japanese and let them now bomb Manhattan or Staten Island. No, they said, praise the Lord, but pass the ammunition. And right down here in Cuba is another example. The entire government praised the violence of the people who were trying to overthrow Castro. Now, they're condoning violence, they're encouraging violence, and they're praising violence.
And at a rally in 1963 in Detroit, before a group of militant Negro leaders, Malcolm said,
how you going to be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered, and at the same time you're going to get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know? If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent, defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. And if it is right for America to draft us and teach us how to be violent in defense of her, then it is right for you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country.
It was statements such as this that led many to believe that Malcolm believed in violence somehow for its own end, and who feared that if he and his followers had the strength, they would begin a reign of terror against the white. James Baldwin said that he feared such a reign of terror. To this, Malcolm replied,
No, I think that they misunderstand when they think that as Muslims we are advocates of violence. But as he said, those who aren't prepared will perish. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad actually is preparing us for what is coming. And you can't, and it's not coming because I'm a Muslim or someone else is a Christian or something of that sort. It's coming because as you sow, so shall you reap. And it is the deeds that America has sown, as Mr. Baldwin put more beautifully, I think, in the New York Times on March the 12th in the magazine section, in studying and analyzing the attitude of the students and the attitude of the Muslims. In essence, he said that the students have faith on their side and the Muslims have facts on their side. And I'm more inclined to rely on those facts. And facts are that we've never been violent toward anyone, but if ever we are attacked as a Muslim, we absolutely do not believe in turning the other cheek. And as Mr. McCummings pointed out, he says that we shouldn't act toward whites as we act toward another country, but we are two countries. The white man and the black man in America are two nations. The difference being that the 20 million black people comprise a nation within another nation. And the white man treats us like a subjected nation. We're colonized, just as Britain colonized Kenya and colonized Tanganyika and France colonized Algeria. The white man here in America has colonized 20 million black people. But he colonized them mentally so that today they don't realize that they were colonized.
But despite his eloquence on the question of violence, even in 1961, Malcolm indicated that it was largely a tactical consideration. It was, he believed, the only possible way for the Negro in America to gain his full manhood and freedom. He agreed that there were conditions under which pacifism might be more effective, or at least sufficiently effective to gain freedom. And although we should be careful not to make too much of this, because he never stressed it, and a more careful reading of Indian history might have made him speak otherwise, it is worthwhile noting his remarks in this regard.
Where over there, they can use the passive approach, which is sit down or sit in or rebel in that way. When you have in India, like Gandhi, where they had 300 or 400 million black people striving against a couple 100,000 white oppressors, then passiveness worked, because all they had to do is stop, sit down. It's like an elephant sitting on a mouse or something. But here they are the majority and the oppressor is the minority. Here in America, you got the black man is the minority. And when you call yourself sitting down on the white man, all he has to do is let you sit. He can get someone else to run his factory or whatever else he wants to do.
If for Malcolm, non-violence, as he sometimes called it, was partially a tactic, how could this stance ultimately lead to the goal of a separate state for colored peoples? Advocates of nonviolence as a tactic, rather than a moral commitment, frequently argue that in the United States the white man so outnumbers the colored that any attempt at a violent revolution would only be immediately crushed. These tacticians argue that the Negro must find alliances in the white community, so that together they may be able to influence the powers that be. Malcolm, in a sense, turned this logic on its head. Where colored people are a majority, he just said, nonviolence may work. Where they are in a minority, it cannot. How, then, did he believe his goals would be reached? In 1960, in his argument with Bayard Rustin, he said,
The white man is just not going to share his wealth with his ex-slave, or share his house with his ex-slave, or share his fields with his ex-slave, if the slave keeps pressing him. Sooner or later, there has to be a showdown. If the white man, the slave master, does not want the ex-slave in his house, then he has to let that slave go for himself and find a house for himself.
In other words, if the Negro became enough trouble for the white man in America, the white man would help the Negro find the land to settle him on. but as long as the Negro passively accepted his conditions, then the white man would do nothing. Malcolm at this time called himself a black nationalist, without the political commitment, and the second aspect of his militance that attracted followers was his eloquent denunciations of the white man. He was, as he was perfectly willing to admit, a black racist.
We have a common enemy. We have this in common. We have a common oppressor, a common exploiter, and a common discriminator. So once we all realize that we have this common enemy, then we unite on the basis of what we have in common. And what we have foremost in common is that enemy, the white man. He's an enemy to all of us. I know some of you all think that some of them aren't enemies. Time will tell. In Bandung, back in, I think, 1954, was the first unity meeting in centuries of black people. And once you study what happened at the Bandung Conference and the results of the Bandung Conference, it actually serves as a model for the same procedure you and I can use to get our problem solved. At Bandung, all the nations came together. They were dark nations from Africa and Asia. Some of them were Buddhists. Some of them were Muslim. Some of them were Christian. Some of them were Confucianists. Some were atheists. Despite their religious differences, they came together. They were able to submerge their little petty differences and agree on one thing, that though one African came from Kenya and was being colonized by the Englishmen, and another African came from the Congo and was being colonized by the Belgian, and another African came from Guinea and was being colonized by the French, and another came from Angola and was being colonized by the Portuguese. When they came to the Bandung Conference, they looked at the Portuguese and at the Frenchman and at the Englishman and at the other Dutchman and learn or realize that the one thing that all of them had in common, they were all from Europe. They were all Europeans, blonde, blue-eyed, and white skin. And when you and I here in Detroit and in Michigan and in America, who have been awakened today, look around us, we too realize here in America, we all have a common enemy. Whether he's in Georgia or Michigan, whether he's in California or New York, he's the same man. Blue eyes and blonde hair and pale skin. Same man.
These two facets were at the heart of Malcolm's program during his years as an envoy for Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. Black racism and an advocacy of self-defense for Negroes. It was his eloquence on these points that attracted the following that he achieved and his national stature. Wherever he went, he was enthusiastically received. In Harlem, he was so powerful that it was virtually impossible to call a rally without inviting Malcolm X to attend. When the Reverend A.D. King, the Reverend Martin Luther King's brother, came to Harlem to speak after the murder of the 6 children in Birmingham, Alabama, Reverend King was booed, while Malcolm was cheered. Toward the end of his relationship with the Nation of Islam, these two aspects of his program were combined into a conscious revolutionary ideology. At a meeting held in Detroit on November 10, 1963, Malcolm addressed a group of militant Negro leaders brought together by an organization called GOAL, Group on Advanced Leadership. At the meeting, Malcolm said in part,
I would like to make a few comments concerning the difference between the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution. There's a difference. Are they both the same? And if they're not, what is the difference? What is the difference between a Black Revolution and a Negro Revolution? First, what is a revolution? Sometimes I'm inclined to believe that many of our people are using this word revolution loosely, without taking careful consideration what this word actually means and what its historic characteristics are. When you study the historic nature of revolutions, the motive of a revolution, the objective of a revolution, and the result of a revolution, and the methods used in a revolution, you may change words. You may devise another program. You may change your goal and you may change your mind. Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? For land. How was it? Why did they want land? Independence. How was it carried out? Bloodshed. The Russian Revolution. What was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. Please. There's been a revolution, a black revolution going on in Africa. In Kenya, the Mau Mau were revolutionaries. They were the ones who made the word uhuru. They were the ones who brought it to the fore. The Mau Mau, they were revolutionaries. They believed in scorched earth. They knocked everything aside that got in their path. And their revolution also was based on land, a desire for land. So I cite these various revolutions, brothers and sisters, to show you, you don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. Only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro Revolution. The Black Revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa. It's rearing its head in Latin America. The Cuban Revolution, that's a revolution. They overturned the system. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think he'll react to you when you learn what a real revolution is? A revolutionary wants land so he can set up his own nation, an independent nation. These Negroes aren't asking for no nation. They're trying to crawl back on the plantation. When you want a nation, that's called nationalism. If you're afraid of black nationalism, you're afraid of revolution. And if you love revolution, you love black nationalism.
(1960, 61, 62, and 3 were busy years for Malcolm X, speaking and lecturing throughout the country. By 1963, he was certainly the best-known minister in the Nation of Islam. According to a New York Times survey of that year, he was the second most sought-after speaker on college campuses. The first was Barry M. Goldwater. There were those within the Nation of Islam who were beginning to talk, those who felt that Malcolm was eclipsing Elijah Muhammad himself. Then, on November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was gunned down on a Dallas street and killed. Within hours after the murder, Muslim ministers had received instructions from the Elijah Muhammad to say nothing about the assassination. Malcolm had a previously scheduled speaking engagement at the Manhattan Center in New York City. During the question period, he was asked what he thought of the president's assassination, and he replied, he said later without a second thought what he honestly felt, that it was a case of the chickens coming home to roost. He explained that the president had stood by when Negroes were being killed, and now he himself had been struck down by violence. Malcolm was called immediately to Chicago and was suspended for 90 days by Elijah Muhammad. He later claimed that on his return to New York he discovered that Muslims were being told, "If you knew what he did, you'd kill him yourself." Shortly afterwards he broke with the Muslims, called a press conference, and announced the formation of his own organization. Later, he said that he had learned certain things about the Muslims that led him to suspect the movement. For example, in a portion of his autobiography, published in Look magazine in the fall of 1964, he wrote that shortly before his break, Elijah had told him, "I'm David. When you read about how David took another man's wife, I'm that David. You read about Noah, who got drunk. That's me. You read about Lot, who went and laid up with his own daughters. I have to fulfill all of these things." Malcolm later let it be known, throughout the Negro communities of the cities he visited, that Elijah had at least 2 paternity suits against him. By the end of the year, he was openly telling reporters, "Muhammad is the man with his house in Phoenix, his $200 suits, and his harem." But at the time of his break from Elijah Muhammad, he publicly would offer nothing but praise for his former spiritual leader. At the press conference in March, he said simply,
"I recognize the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as being the one who taught me what I know and who made me whatever I am or whatever I've been. I recognize him and respect him for that. And probably I've made more speeches than any other Muslim, probably beside Mr. Muhammad himself. And no one can take any speech that I've ever made on any program I've ever been and find any moment even when I didn't give Mr. Muhammad full credit for everything that I know and everything that I am. And so when narrow minds come to the conclusion that I'm trying to be something other than what he wants me to be, then those minds are too narrow for me to work with.
You wouldn't want to elaborate on the inward...
I don't think that it accomplishes anything to dwell upon things that divide us. I think it accomplishes more to dwell upon things that unite us. And any unpleasant experiences that I've had or unjust experiences that I've had with anyone, as far as I'm concerned, it's in the past. And now I'm trying to look forward and trying to get as many Negroes as is possible to look forward and go forward in a forward-going movement.
And the program that Malcolm announced at that time was only an adaptation of the program of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam.
Number one, because 1964 threatens to be a very explosive year on the racial front, and because I myself intend to be very active in every phase of the American Negro struggle for human rights, I have called this press conference this morning in order to clarify my own position in the struggle, especially in regards to politics and nonviolence. I wish to speak for just 10 or 15 minutes and then open myself for questions. I am and always will be a Muslim. My religion is Islam. I still believe that Mr. Muhammad's analysis of the problem is the most realistic and that his solution is the best one. This means that I, too, believe that the best solution is complete separation, with our people going back home, that is, to our African homeland. But separation back to Africa is still a long-range program, and while it is yet to materialize, 22 million of our people who are still here in America need better food, better clothing, better housing, better education, and better jobs right now. Mr. Muhammad's program does point us back homeward, but it also contains within it what we could and should be doing to help solve our own problems right now while we're still in America. But internal differences within the Nation of Islam forced me out of it. I did not leave of my own free will, but now that it has happened, I intend to make the most of it. Now that I have more independence of action, I intend to use a more flexible approach toward working with others to get a solution to this problem. I'm not out to fight other Negro leaders or other Negro organizations. We must find a common approach, a common solution to a common problem. As of this minute, I have forgotten everything bad that the other leaders have said about me, and I pray they can also forget the many bad things that I have said about them. The problem facing our people here in America is bigger than all the other personal or organizational differences. Therefore, as leaders, we must stop worrying about the threat that we seem to think we pose to each other's personal prestige and concentrate our united efforts toward solving the unending hurt that is being done daily to our people here in America. I'm going to organize and head a new mosque in New York City known as the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. This gives us a religious base and the spiritual force necessary to rid our people of the vices that destroy the moral fiber of our community. Our political philosophy will be black nationalism. Our economic and social philosophy will be black nationalism. Our cultural emphasis will be upon black nationalism. Many of our people aren't religiously inclined, so the Muslim Mosque Incorporated will be organized in such manner to provide for the active participation of all Negroes in our political, economic, and social programs, despite their religious or non-religious beliefs. The political philosophy of black nationalism means we must control the politics and the politicians of our own community. They must no longer take orders from outside forces, and we will organize and sweep out of office all Negro politicians who are puppets for these outside forces. Our accent will be upon youth. We need new ideas, new methods, new approaches. We will call upon young students of political science throughout the nation to help us. We will encourage these young students to launch their own independent study and then give us their analysis and their suggestions. We are completely disenchanted with the old, adult, established politicians. We want to see some new faces, more militant faces. The Muslim Mosque will remain wide open for ideas and financial aid from all quarters. Whites can help us, but they can't join us. There can be no black-white unity until there is first some black unity. There can be no workers' solidarity until there is first some racial solidarity. We cannot think of uniting with others until we have first united among ourselves. We cannot think of being acceptable to others until we have first proven acceptable to ourselves. One can't unite bananas with scattered leaves. Concerning nonviolence, it is criminal to teach a man not to defend himself when he is the constant victim of brutal attacks. It is legal and lawful in this country to own a shotgun or a rifle, and we believe in obeying the law. In areas where our people are the constant victims of brutality and the government seems unable or unwilling to protect them, we should form rifle clubs that can be used to defend ourselves and our property in times of emergency, such as happened last year in Birmingham, Alabama, in Plaquemine, Louisiana, in Cambridge, Maryland, and in Danville, Virginia. When our people are being bitten by dogs, they are within their right to kill those dogs. We should be peaceful, we should be law-abiding, but the time has come for the American Negro to fight back in self-defense whenever and wherever he is being unjustly and unlawfully attacked. Now, if the government thinks that I'm wrong for saying this, then the government should start doing its job.
10 days after this press conference, Malcolm was speaking at what would become one of a regular series of Sunday night talks, interrupted only for his trip to Africa. This talk, of March 22, 1964, is similar in many aspects to those you have already heard, yet it pointed in a new direction. In the first place, Malcolm was much more specifically and clearly political, and less religious. His subject, for that matter, was ballots or bullets. His would not be a religious movement, he said.
That we're going to have a short chat tonight on the ballot or the bullet. Nothing has played a greater role in American history than ballots and bullets. In fact, I imagine there is no one more authority or a greater authority on ballots and bullets than Uncle Sam is. But before we get into that, I would like to point out my reason for not opening the meeting with a prayer or anything of that sort. It is true that my religion is Islam, and Islam is the religion of many of the brothers and sisters who are present, but also the religion of many of the brothers and sisters present is Christianity, and some of them have religious beliefs other than that. And it is not our intention during the coming months ahead to try and force our religion upon anyone. My religion is Islam. That's my personal belief. Whatever your personal religion is, we feel that that's your business. This rally that we're going to have, and the rallies we'll be having every Sunday and Sunday night, right on into the summer months, will not be religious rallies. There'll be rallies designed to enable you and me to discuss the hell that we've been catching here in America at the hands of the white man, and what we can do after submerging our religious differences toward getting together in unity and harmony to eliminate these injustices by whatever means necessary. Insofar as our religious services are concerned, the Muslims who want to learn more about the religion of Islam, we will have religious services for the brothers on Monday night at the Hotel Teresa on the mezzanine floor, and on Thursday night for the sisters. And insofar as the public is concerned, who wants to learn more about our religion, they can come to that same place, the Teresa Hotel, on Wednesday nights and Friday nights at 8 o'clock all during those nights. But when we come out of our religious services, then we're interested in human rights, the right to be a human being. We're interested in human rights for not just ourselves, the Muslims, or just ourselves, the Christians, or just ourselves, the nationalists, but we're interested in human rights for every one of the 22 million black people in this country who have been deprived of human rights for the past 400 years.
The talk also seemed to me more self-consciously tactical than his earlier speeches. He knew what it was that would get his audiences to respond. After first pointing out to them the importance of the Negro vote in the 1960 election between Kennedy and Nixon, Malcolm went on.
The reason you lent your support to this administration was because they told you what they were going to do for you if you got in their corner. You got in their corner. You enabled them to brush Nixon aside. Now, they've been down there for 4 years. What have they done? They give a job to Hatcher. They put Carl Rowan up where he could tell the world how good America is. They give a few good jobs to a few more good Negroes. You and I are still hungry, still in the ghetto, still out here demonstrating to get a desegregated school, not in Mississippi, but in New York City. Something's got to happen. If ballots won't do it, bullets will.
But despite such appeals to the crowd, the speech showed that Malcolm had a concrete and sophisticated understanding of the political power that a block of Negro votes could wield, and he carefully explained to the audience the structure of the Democratic Party and it and the government's dominance by a Dixiecratic minority that controlled key committees and patronage. He explained gerrymandering in the North. While Malcolm continued to urge sophisticated political activity by Negroes, he also suggested that the movement must be internationalized. This was the second new and important aspect of his program as an independent leader. At the rally, he put it this way.
So, brothers and sisters, since we can see that the Uncle Sam has failed us, and he has failed us. Eastland is part of Uncle Sam. Senator Russell, that's Uncle Sam. Goldwater, that's Uncle Sam. He's just as much Uncle Sam as Javits and Keating and the rest of them. All of them are part of the same system. And it is the system that is being used to deprive you and me of our rights. It's not a Southern senator, it's the system. The Southern senator is using an outdated system
an antiquated system, a very tricky and treacherous system to further the political oppression and the political exploitation of 22 million black people in this country. So what must we do? As long as we're running around here asking the white man for civil rights, we're at his mercy. As long as we're in Washington, D.C. asking him for civil rights, we're at his mercy. The entire civil rights program has to be expanded from the level of civil rights to the level of human rights. When you take it from the level of civil rights and put it on the level of human rights, you internationalize the problem. And when you internationalize it, you open the gate for support from every nation on this planet who is for the human rights of mankind. It's true that it's within the power of Uncle Sam to give or not give you and me civil rights. But human rights are something that you have when you're born. Human rights involves the right to be a human being. And in the United Nations Charter, you have what's known as the Covenant on Human Rights, the Declaration of Human Rights. There are committees that are set up in the UN for the sole purpose of fighting for the human rights of downtrodden people all over this earth. And now the human rights of the people in South Africa have been taken before the United Nations. The human rights of our people in Angola and Mozambique and the Congo has gone before the United Nations. It's not an accident that your and my plight has never reached the UN. You and I are more thoroughly trodden upon and exploited and spat upon than our brothers in South Africa and Angola and Mozambique and all other parts of this earth. But there has been a conspiracy to keep you and me barking up the civil rights tree so we wouldn't be aware of the human rights tree. The civil rights program must be expanded to the level of human rights so that our case can be taken before the United Nations. Since Uncle Sam, the civil rights movement has given Uncle Sam since 1954 to implement the desegregation decision of the Supreme Court. Uncle Sam is so crooked that he hasn't even implemented the decision of the highest court he has. So since you and I can't get justice from Uncle Sam in his court, let's take Uncle Sam before the world court.
Malcolm spoke, as he always had, of the need for Negro unity and for Negro organizations that excluded the white man, because the white man, he said, would always act as a wedge to divide and disrupt the Negro. He called himself a black nationalist and urged the formation of a black nationalist party and army if necessary.
In either April, May, or June, whatever the case may be, depending upon the progress or lack of progress, we can call for a united front of all groups. No group has to do away with the other group. No leader has to make the other leader look small or bad. We will all be equal. There'll be no big I's or little U's. Every organization will come together in a united front. And then if we all agree that it is necessary to form a black nationalist party, we'll form one. We'll form whatever is necessary after a close analysis of the problem from all sources, and everyone is heard from. If it is necessary to form a black nationalist party or a black nationalist army,
We'll form it. It'll be ballots or bullets.
When it came to specifics, Malcolm called for a massive voter registration drive for Negroes, support of Jesse Gray's rent strike program, and consideration of expanding it to cover all of Harlem from 110th Street, river to river. He suggested the establishment of close ties with the Afro-Asian nations, who could take a joint petition to the United Nations on the behalf of Negro Americans. Organizationally, he only suggested at that time a unity conference of nationalist groups to form some kind of coalition. His weekly meetings of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated continued through the late winter and early spring, until Malcolm's pilgrimage to Mecca. On that trip, he traveled throughout Africa. In Ghana and Nigeria, he met with Julius Nyerere, Kenyatta, Mbota, Nkrumah, and Sekou Touré. He learned several things in his trip. First, that an open fight with the Nation of Islam would be degrading and necessary. Thus, although he had written to the New York Times from the Orient that he would expose the Muslims on his return, at first he was still circumspect. Secondly, his belief that the American Negro movement should be internationalized was reinforced. Malcolm returned to New York City on May 21st, and for the first time publicly told the press that his ideas on the white man had altered. In Mecca, under Islam, he had seen white and black men practice true brotherhood. For America, however, Malcolm was still pessimistic. The difference between Johnson and Goldwater, he said, was simply the difference between the fox and the wolf. Conservatism, he wrote, is only meaning, let's keep the niggers in their place, and liberalism is meaning, let's keep the Negroes in their place, but tell them we'll treat them a little better, let's fool them more, with more promises. I do not, unfortunately, have any tapes of Malcolm after his return from Africa. I do, however, have extensive notes on a meeting he held on February 15th at the Audubon Auditorium. It was another in the regular series that he had been holding since his break from Elijah Muhammad. About 400 people were in attendance. The day before, Malcolm's home had been bombed, and his children almost killed. He was bitter against the Muslims and declared that he knew the Muslims well, and one thing they can do is bomb a house and kill babies. He said that while he had been a Muslim, a Joseph X had been found stuffed in a garbage can. Then, for the first time, he launched into a full-scale attack on the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad. He said that while it attracted the most militant Negroes, it held them in check and was basically a do-nothing organization, built around a senile old man who was interested only in sex and money. Elijah Muhammad had told him, Malcolm said, that he had fathered 9 children by teenagers. In 1960, Malcolm said, he and Jeremiah X had negotiated with the Ku Klux Klan for a piece of land to set up a separate black community. He said that Klan members and George Lincoln Rockwell of the American Nazi Party attended Muslim meetings at the special behest of Elijah. He called the Nation of Islam a criminal organization, used as a machine by a crazy old man and his children. But the brunt of his remarks were on his movement, the Organization of Afro-American Unity and its program. He repeated again that he was not anti-white, nor anti-White Plains, he added, but only pro-Harlem. It was his conviction that unity among blacks was most important at this point, and that everything must be done to create that unity. But, he added, I'm for anything you're for, if it will get results. Malcolm was bitter against the government, partly, he said, for getting school children to go south to do the government's business. The government, he said, was too corrupt with racists. Yet basically, Malcolm said, I put the blame on us. We've been too easy, too peaceful, too forgetful, too loving, too compromising. Islam, he said, is not a religion of color, but judges by a man's intentions, by his behavior and deeds. What I denounce, he said, is not the white man because he is white, but because of his actions. I'll shake his hand, he said, but first he has to become all right. We don't want a black Ku Klux Klan, he said. We need a black people who believe in the brotherhood of man and will fight for it. In that struggle for brotherhood, Malcolm said, the Negro must be willing to learn everything that may be necessary. His next meeting was called for Sunday, February 21st. Moments after Malcolm stepped to the podium, a scuffle broke out in the hall, and Malcolm's bodyguards bolted from his side to break it up. As they left his side, at least 2 men with pistols rose from a different point in the audience and pumped bullets into Malcolm, while a third stepped from behind the stage and opened up with a sawed-off shotgun. Malcolm X was dead within minutes. He was 39 years old. He had once said, "It has always stayed in my mind that I would die by violence. I have done all that I can to be prepared." Most of the white press gloated just a bit over his death, recalling what Malcolm had once said when Kennedy was murdered, about the chickens coming home to roost. Others, particularly his followers, charged that he had not been killed by other blacks, but by the white power structure, or some part of it, on the orders of the white man. Malcolm himself, of course, expected the Nation of Islam to take its revenge on him. I have no reason to doubt his own analysis. Nonetheless, the fact that one group of blacks can kill the leader of another is a measure of what this society has created, and I suppose in that sense we can be blamed, if you wish. But then it will have to be all of us, black and white, who are blamed. He said in his autobiography, published in Look, that he hoped that one day people would say of him that he had helped to save America from a grave, even possibly fatal, catastrophe. That cannot be said of him, but then he never really had a chance.
What is looked upon as an American dream for white people has long been an American nightmare for black people.
This is Chris Koch, and this has been my essay on Malcolm X.